The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tylor, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet.
Wait, Tylor, I know what that means now.
Yeah, no, you really don't.
And we're back. Welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly read-along Wheel of Time podcast. You know us, you love us. If you're listening to this, God, you've been with us a very long time. But anyway, as if this were someone's new episode, first episode, I will introduce myself. I am Greg. I know very little about the Wheel of Time. And particularly, as I recently revealed to Tylor, spelling and pronunciation is just atrocious. And who's that guy I just mentioned? Why, of course, it's Tylor, who knows everything and is continually annoyed by how I learned so slowly. Tylor, how's it going?
I know like 60%, and I am continually impressed at how much you are picking up on a first read, even if half of it is me reminding you of it repeatedly. It works. I will also note, you know a decent amount about this series. I'd bet by word count, we are at about the 25% mark of all of the books in the Wheel of Time. So it's been a while. Get ready for it to be a while longer, but I don't think you can completely call yourself a novice at this point. You're a quarter of the way through.
Well, and as a sign of my continued commitment to this show, my wife and I, so she has this awesome job where she goes to independent bookstores and sells books for a publisher. I am now off because a hot academic summer. So now my time is like, she's like, hey, I'm driving like an hour to this cool bookstore. Want to come? And I've done it 2 times so far. And this is my new life. Like, this is all I want to do. So I have started because, you know, I like to support indie bookstores. And so whenever I'm in one, I start to look, I kind of have the checklist of like the next book in each of 3 or 4 series that I'm looking for to support. And I started looking for book number 5 because we're closer to that than we are to the beginning of book 4. So
yeah, after tonight, we have 10 weeks left. So if you are someone who likes to count down and then buy the new book, it's time to start counting down to the fires of heaven. Pick it up sometime soon.
Well, and it's funny because I would say this is my experience across all book series. Like if you are looking for book number 1 and it's a popular series, you're guaranteed to find it. 2 and 3, pretty safe bet. But once you kind of cross over to 5, 6, 7, it's not often there. So that's why I started the hunt a little early, because I think it's going to take a little time. And then, you know, after that, it's like only the new book after book 7 in some given series. So it's on my list. I'm starting the hunt. I'll let everybody know when I find it.
Really interestingly, one last thought about this before we actually, talk about the chapters we read this week. The Wheel of Time, you will actually pretty frequently find the last 3 books on shelves, I think just because they have Brandon Sanderson's name on it. And so having one of those works out. You didn't mute your mic when you coughed, just so you know. I think it is time that we begin our discussion of Chapter 41, Among the Tuatha'an, unless you had any last thoughts before we dive in.
I did not. I
am changing to the correct mic settings. So my voice quality might have just changed for the listeners. My apologies.
It got much better.
I think I was in a, I was going to say, I think I was in a work meeting. So I was just talking to my laptop the other day. So for the record, I did mute for my cough. It was just on a microphone that wasn't plugged into the computer.
Well, now I can't edit it out. It's part of the transition.
I would love for you to take us into chapter 41, Among the Tuatha'an, and chapter 42 later a missing leaf.
I just want to note that you have said the word Tuatha'an correctly twice in a row on the podcast, and that's a victory based on how we started this episode. In chapter 41, among the Tuatha'an, the group approaches the camp of the Tinkers, and the Aiel insist that they are not going to stay with what they refer to as the Lost Ones. Bane and Chiad, as they are walking away, say that they are going to offer to play Maiden's Kiss with Gaul, and then the Tinkers are actually a group that we have already met before. It is Isla, Rayan, and the group that Perrin is familiar with. They don't recognize Perrin immediately and seem surprised that anyone really knows their traditions. And it's also worth noting the Two Rivers folks are very surprised that Perrin knows what is going on here. But Rayan eventually recognizes Perrin's eyes, and then Isla asks after Elias, and she also chastises Perrin for the amount of violence that he's been doing. She says she thought that once he would come around to the way of the leaf, but clearly he has given up on it. Perrin says that the Tuatha'an should come to Emond's Field in order to avoid the Trollocs, but he's rebuffed pretty quickly and is told that all things die in time. At this point, Ivan, the warder, tells him that anyone can be surprised and it's not his fault, and then he is sent out of the room immediately because it is time to try to heal Perrin. It is decided that the arrow will stay in until the Aes Sedai can heal him, because they don't have the ability to deal with the barbed arrow the way that they need to. And it's worth noting that both Isla and Faile talk about Perrin as if he's not in the room. It really annoys him, but it doesn't bother me at all. Isla once again kind of tells Perrin that she's disappointed in him, that he couldn't find the way of the leaf. And when he disputes that it's for everyone, she says that it is for everyone if only they knew it. Perrin then tells Faile that he blundered, but she reminds him of all of the good that he did along the way. And her father says that generals can either weep for the dead or take care of the living, but not both. Perrin says that he's not a general, but he gets shut down by Faile, who explains to him that he very clearly is a general, and a general can never desert men who count on him. Aram then enters, commenting both on Perrin's eyes and also asking after Egwene, and in doing so, he does mention that Perrin runs with the wolves, which seems to surprise Faile. At this point, he is immediately sent, or that is, Aram is immediately sent away. Perrin says that Aram smiles too much, which causes Faile to laugh because she realizes that he's just being jealous again. And then Perrin bluntly asks her who her father is. She reveals that her father is a lord and the uncle to the Queen of Saldia. Faile justifies her deception and basically says that her father actually does all of the things that she claimed. He just also is very important. And then she also dismisses his insistence that he is just a blacksmith and thus not potentially worthy to marry someone who is a lord. And we learn that both of her brothers died, meaning that she was the heir to the family, and that is what caused her to run away. She then asks him about wolves, having gotten a few hints from a variety of people, most recently Aram, and he tells her the entire story about Elias and everything that he worries about with the wolves. She basically ignores the negatives of this and says that her father will fully approve of him and that she is going to tell her mother that he is the king of the wolves in order to win her over. Suddenly, she gives him a drink, which clearly has medicine in it, and he falls asleep as she refers to him as her wolf king. I actually thought this was a really lovely scene. We've talked about how I don't love romance in general, but this was my favorite romantic scene that Robert Jordan has put together so far. I don't even think of this as the scene with the big revelation. I just think of it as a really great Perrin and Faile moment. What was your take on this chapter?
I think it runs counter to the joke we continually make where or actually it agrees with the joke, which is this is a moment where characters are finally just talking. And it's yes, when you just talk and you share your information, then you work through your problems. And so in that regard, I agree with you. I think it was one of the better moments of these two characters because they kind of both got the chips off their shoulders and just kind of connected and shared all these things. And, for Perrin, these feel like dangerous revelations, I guess for Faile too, but it seems like a lesser danger in some ways. And yet they found acceptance in each other and they just agree to enjoy that. I will say, I think I already said this on air, that one of the things I've been doing lately is all the Spider-Man movies are back in theaters, and my son has wanted to go to all of them. And Spider-Man 2, the original Tobey Maguire one, ends with Mary Jane having found out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and sirens go off or something, and she just like whispers in his ear, like, "Go get him, Tiger." And "Goodnight, my Wolf King" felt like "Go get him,
Yeah.
Tiger" to me. And being of the exact right age for Kirsten Dunst, and hearing her kind of sultry "Go get him, Tiger," it's like, yeah, let's see some teen romance here. It kind of had that ring to it.
I like that a lot. I would not have made that connection, but you are exactly right. And I think that moment you describe of both of them reveal something important and they get closer as a result of it is the kind of thing that works really well when it's in a book, and then it immediately resolves too many problems for authors to do it too frequently. So it's nice when we get it, and I'm glad we do here. Before all of that lovely kind of romance and the revelation, we do get a decent amount of like the Tinkers and their culture. And I thought the most interesting part of this was the Two Rivers folks reacting to the Tinkers. So especially given that this is a group we've already met before, even these individuals, I'm curious what you focused on, because there's a lot of this section that could be read as kind of reminding us of who the Tinkers are, but I think there's enough kind of like small moments within to keep me interested, so it's not just a recap.
Yeah, there's a few pieces that stood out. I'm gonna bracket this conversation, or this answer, by saying that I'm still having trouble feeling anything about any of the Two Rivers boys, other than Perrin, obviously. But like,
yeah.
this like mass of young men coming with us to fight Trollocs, they are named and they keep being named, and I'm like, don't care, don't understand, don't seem to matter. And it is a funny thing where my mind like doesn't consider them real for a little while. This is any character, so it's
Yeah.
like I don't pay attention. And then if one of them does make it into like continuing on, I'm like, oh dang it, I wish I remembered what they did in the first.
Honestly, at this point, Will flirts with a lot of women and Ban has a big nose, I think, are really the only details we need to be pulling out for us to remember the important Two Rivers folk. You're not wrong to be ignoring the vast majority of that.
Well, and so then I will say that a lot of it did read like, hey, it's been 2 books since we saw the Tinkers. You should remember them and get to know them again.
Yeah.
As well as returning to them now, understanding a bigger piece of their origin story from
Yeah.
the big chapters. I'm forgetting the Ruidon.
Roydian, but you could also just call them the
Roydian.
glass columns, man. It's in the name
The
of the
glass column. Oh,
podcast.
that's true. That's true. The glass columns chapter. So it was good to. I think it was important to do that. And again, I always feel like I'm cheating. It's like I'm reading the Cliff Notes with you each week, so things stand out to me more.
Yeah.
But I imagine if you're sitting there reading this on your own, and it's like, oh right, we have met these before, and so
Totally.
on.
So I do actually want to pull out one detail that's related to that, because there's a moment that I am not entirely clear on. At the very beginning of the chapter, they are approaching the Tinkers, and the Aiel are clearly hesitant to approach the Tinkers. That doesn't bother me at all. What's weird to me is that Bane and Chiad refer to them as the Lost Ones, which feels like a very descriptive name for them, given that only clan chiefs and wise ones actually know the history of what went on through the glass columns, right? Rand is unique in his position of knowing that. And so I'm okay with the culture having like a vague disdain for the Tinkers because of that kind of shared cultural past, but all three of Bane, Chiad, and Gaul knowing that nickname struck me as a little bit like, ooh, how did they get that much detail? It felt a little strong given the amount of information they would have. That was the only moment that really jumped out at me related to that kind of history.
I'll take that, but yet I think you're right to question it, and then I can like make up versions in my head that can make that make sense, right? So I do think you could easily say that yes, while the clan chiefs have this idea of it, easily around a campfire you can talk about, oh, there's a wagon train. If you ever see one when you're going across the spine of the world, look out or whatever.
Yeah.
Like there are reasons they might have shared that, but I take the point, certainly. The other, maybe I'm jumping ahead too far. The part that stood out to me, I mean, I liked the kind of let's catch up. Perrin has changed so much. I
Yeah.
think, again, we're getting these signals that if you are rushing through these, the characters are changing significant as we go.
Yeah. No, and I think that that's important to recognize, right? Perrin is physically changing. His kind of approach to problem solving is changing. And most notably in these chapters, his approach to violence is changing, right? The first time that he encountered the Tinkers, he really kind of sided with them and thought of violence as a last resort. And now he finds himself almost advocating against the way of the leaf to some degree, right? He seems to be arguing, you will not be safe. You must come somewhere where people will protect you with violence. And that feels like a really major shift that would be very easy to miss if Perrin didn't occasionally run into pacifists who challenge his interest in violence. And then, oh no, the next thing I wanted to say comes up in the next chapter, so we'll mention it then.
Well, kind of on a related point, just to get our mention of the Star Wars prequels in for this, I've always understood that the prequels switched to battle droids because they wanted to have people mowing down tons of enemies, and you can't do that in a kids movie if they're humans. And I do think the Trollocs function that way in my mind, where it's like, and it's kind of Lord of the Rings too, where it's like you're killing just these monstrous entities. So it is striking to me that when the way of the leaf applies to them as well, right? Like, and of course it does. That's what real pacifism is. But I have that moment where I'm like, yeah, but they're just Trollocs. Like, he didn't kill anybody like important. They're just beasties, right?
So this has always been my problem with the way of the leaf, right? I myself am a literal pacifist who I'd like to believe if someone did violence to me, I would not respond in any violent way whatsoever. But I don't think I would have those beliefs in a world where there was a literal devil who had an army of beast creatures that only wanted to eat me, right? Like, I think my position on violence is only tenable because there is not a great evil come to get me. And they don't have that. And this has always been my concern about that philosophy in that world. It makes a lot of sense to me anywhere that doesn't have literal black and white.
Yeah, sorry, just 1 second. No, Siri, set a reminder next time I see Tyler to punch him. See what happens. Oh, by the way, happy birthday. Can't wait for your birthday party. That's the next time I'll see you.
Oh, it's going to be a fun birthday. Just get assaulted.
To your actual point and not my dumb joke, like I think that sounds right to me. And I do wonder if that's part of, like, I just alluded to Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. Like, it's part of how we're cultured to be like, yeah, if there's a great darkness and it's America, it's 2024. We might be ready to have a great darkness fall upon us. But I do think that, it is a more complicated moral path to do what the Tinkerers do, and they are pure and they are stronger in a way I respect, right? Even if I think it's impractical. What happens if, say, this lovely group of people is now in a location where there are terrible beasties? I don't know why I've chosen that name for the Trollocs tonight.
Nope, that's the word now.
But so the Trollocs are here, and they might have to confront this. And obviously, when we cross the streams into the television show, we've seen a confrontation, I believe, between the Tinkers and the White Cloaks.
Correct.
There's kind of a standoff, right? It's not armed conflict, and we saw them essentially accept the blows of the White Cloaks and not reciprocate. So I think that is a lot harder if it's just like a goat-faced beastie, trying to stab you. But maybe we'll see that in the last 300 pages of this book.
We'll find out.
Comment.
I just briefly need to mention the name Arum. He shows up for 30 seconds. I feel like it is mostly just a reminder that he exists. But if we were talking before about Perrin kind of gets a lot of opportunities to show how he's changed, even if we haven't noticed it, Arum is the opposite of that. We haven't seen him in a long time, and he has seemingly gone from super happy, bubbly, Egwene is around, I'm going to marry her, to super sullen, seems kind of frustrated with life, and the second he learns that Egwene isn't there, he just kind of storms out of the room without basically any prompting. It seems like a character who something has changed for him as well, although we obviously don't have the details to put it together. I have nothing else to say about it. I just need to put a flag on that character. Any last thoughts on any of the Aiel before we finish up our discussion of Faile and Perrin and move on to the next chapter?
Just to say that in terms of that boy, I wrote down it seemed very, very strange that Perrin reacted so strongly to him, right? It was like he smiles too much and is kind of grumpy about him. And that to me was like marker for future conflict is how I read that. Like
Yeah.
they don't like each other. Clearly, I mean, who wouldn't be in love with Egwene? But it was very much a one beat like moment and on we go.
Yeah, I actually wanted to pull out Faile's reaction to that because I think Faile is a character who gets a decent amount of flack from some people for being a kind of passive aggressive character, right? And we've seen that several times in the past couple of books. When she and Perrin have a conflict, she has a tendency to like be angry at him for things that she hasn't explicitly told him she doesn't appreciate, and it causes tension. In this case, though, she diffuses that tension immediately. There have been multiple points in the past like 3 chapters that Perrin has been jealous, and every time she just giggles and doesn't care about it. And I kind of need to give her credit for that, right? Like she is diffusing these situations well, even as she has occasionally created problems in other situations by responding poorly to these kind of things.
Yeah, and I think as we transition into the revelation, it's like all of these little hints along the ways about how diplomatic she is and how well she reads people.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell it to you like in Star Wars. I have come to believe that, Princess Leia's Force abilities were at work the whole time that character was alive. And like she was reading people, she was negotiating those situations. And we've seen those same kind of abilities in Faile. So it seems that a lot of the tension is Perrin not living up to that and not being able to kind of read people as well. And so it all kind of fits a piece of like, yeah, she might think this guy is an idiot too, but she's going to be diplomatic about it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And to me, the really interesting detail here is not that Faile is a noble, but that she is apparently the inheriting noble, right? Like if we're thinking about where this goes, Perrin and the third daughter probably isn't that odd of a relationship. Perrin and someone who is going to become the lord in whatever kingdom is the uncle to the queen. That feels like a much bigger deal. And so that to me is the piece that really stood out about this is immediately after we get the revelations on both sides, Faile immediately starts thinking about how her parents will react if she marries Perrin. And that to me is like we solve one problem and create another, and it's kind of multiplying, right? Because now we've got 2 parents to worry about, apparently. That was the shift that I found really fun here is like we get the detail, it's exciting, and then it creates more problems than it solves. What was your thought? Because obviously this is the first time you've experienced this revelation, and so you probably had a very different take on it than me, who's been dropping hints at you about it for an entire book.
I mean, literally the first thing I did was flip to the map and start to piece out this together. So if listeners did not do that and do so now, mini discussion of visual object on a non-visual podcast, it is the northern kind of northwestern portion of the continent that we're looking at. And so I realized mentally that I had kind of thought of like there's the blank area of the map and thought of the Aiel Waste to the east as also the Blight, but the Blight is clearly to the north.
To the north,
and
yeah.
I'm gesturing as if anybody other than you could see this, and my dog is getting freaked out. But I would say that to me would brought up a couple interesting things. So it's like, okay, so we've been to Faldara, which is essentially the corner where the two don't really meet, but where the edges kind of come together. And in Faldara, we saw that they had to go fight Trollocs all the time up in the Blight, not the Aiel Waste, which I think I had it confused a little bit. And then then it's like, okay, so they're over in that corner. There's lots of Trollocs fighting here. We now know that they're over here, also bordering the Blight, so they're probably also facing Trolloc invasions in that region right now,
Yep.
and maybe really need the daughter heir. And then the last piece that came to mind was Lan, because we now have two, heirs to important kingdoms up in the north.
Just to be very careful, Faile may not be the heir. She is the heir to her father's kind of lordship or whatever, but he is the uncle of the queen. So there's probably we don't know if she has daughters or sons or other people who could inherit the queen. Sorry.
Totally fair. And I kind of interpreted that as the uncle. There's a Shakespeare reference there. I'm not going to get right, but it's like the real power. I guess it's Hamlet. Okay. Yeah. But like I kind of, and I have no evidence for this, but I kind of naturally went to, well, there's a queen who sits on a throne, but the uncle really controls everything. And Faile would almost like a queen prime minister situation or something like that, like the actual executor instead of the
similar
ceremonial figurehead.
The similar thing that we've gotten in Caemlyn is in Caemlyn, there is the queen who is the political power, and then she appoints a Lord Captain Commander who for a long time had been Gareth Brine and then now is I forget what the name he's taken, but the Forsaken, who is now in a relationship with Morgaze. My read was it was kind of something like that, is that like the queen would potentially be the political power, but then Faile's father is very much like the head of the military and kind of the executive branch, if you will, to the queen's legislative.
Well, and so, stipulate that it's not the exact same thing because Lan is literally the heir and just has to raise his banner and call his people to him. It's like, oh, I guess we're gonna go north before too long, right? It's kind of like there's a lot in play, and we now have these kingdoms there. So I don't know if I'm ready to say book 5, but I assume 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there.
Is there anything that you would like to say about the rest of this chapter before we move on, my Wolf King?
No. I wrote down limits of the way of the leaf, but I don't remember what that was in regards to. So I think we've already covered it. If there are any,
I have some notes on that in the next chapter, so I think we're good.
Yeah, let's go on.
Excellent. Chapter 42, A Missing Leaf, which is a really good chapter title, I just have to say. It's not often Robert Jordan hits the multiple meanings well, but he nailed it on this one. Perrin is among the tinker wagons in the world of dreams. It takes him a minute to realize that he is there, and the first thing that tips him off is that there is no arrow in his chest. He unexpectedly feels his hammer rather than the axe at his side and thinks that he made his choice, and he wants the axe, it seems like. He has chosen that life. He chooses not to call Hopper because Slayer may be about and he doesn't want to put him at risk, and then he sees a number of abandoned farms and starts to think about how word of him has potentially spread, and so he starts traveling around to a number of farms trying to figure out how many people have actually abandoned their farms and gone into the village in the way that he was suggesting. He, as he is doing so, finds a number of farms that are burnt out, and also finds a number of things that seem to be dull or vanishing in Teleron Riode. When people move along, there's no longer permanence to some of these things. And so we can tell that things have kind of recently been changing by the way that this happens. He then goes to the mountains where he first saw Slayer kind of searching for signs of things that are going wrong. And when he arrives at the Waygate, he sees that it is open and no longer locked. There is only one of the leaves at it. And he can actually witness the Waygate open and then close. And he thinks that there must be Trollocs coming through the Waygate at the moment, and he wonders how it possibly is that this has happened. Suddenly, there is an arrow being fired at him, and he has to dodge, and then he has to determine where it came from. Eventually, he realizes that it is Slayer, and he thinks that he needs to get a better look. So he's able to kind of dodge around, avoid notice, and then he is able to get his first real clear look at Slayer. He wears borderland clothing, and he wears his hair in the Malkieri style and looks an enormous amount like Lan, but then he thinks that there are no more living Malkieri other than Lan, so that is not possible. Perrin pursues Slayer to the east as he runs away, but stops, and Slayer eventually approaches him, kind of congratulating for the trick of locking the Waygate, Waygate, and he says that there were originally just enough white cloaks to occupy there were just enough Trollocs to occupy the white cloaks and kill who he refers to as the traitor, but now they are going to scour the two rivers. Perrin chooses not to pursue Slayer as he flees, and he kind of has to struggle to wake up because of the medicine, and eventually ends up in a regular dream instead of waking entirely. Eventually, he does wake, and Faile says that he slept fitfully, and he says that he needs to go to the mountains so he can close the Waygate, but she says he needs the Aes Sedai healer before he can do anything else. He tells her about the Waygate and all of the detail, and she says that he can't do anything in his current condition. At this point, Yvonne enters and takes the news of new Trollocs in the area in stride, and insists that they need to take their time and not leave immediately. Yvonne seems to be convinced that the best thing they can do is take their time and rest and recover. At this point, Faile gets breakfast and apparently fixed Perrin's shirt and is very good at sewing. I don't know why that needed a shout out, but we got it. And all of the boys from the Two Rivers seem to be better, especially Will, who is flirting, and Faile seems surprised to hear that Perrin has seen the Tinker women dance, the dance that is known as the Tganza, and says that someday she will have to show him the Sasara, which causes even the Tinkers to be very scandalized. Perrin then once again invites the Tinkers to come with him to Emond's Field, but they refuse, saying that the Way of the Leaf includes accepting everything that comes, even the end of one's life. They begin their farewells, but Aram seems really sullen and uninvolved, and Faile hugs a bunch of the men, but none of the young women approach Perrin for hugs. He thinks that Faile kind of is controlling things even without really putting much effort into it. Perrin wishes them peace and they depart. The Aiel wait some time before returning, and then Perrin asks about Maiden's kiss of Gaul, and Gaul seems taken aback at this and shocked and asks who suggested it. Perrin says it was Chiad, and he says that a Murdrail fights with more honor than a woman and refuses to give more details. Then Faile is asked whether she understands kind of what is going on with the Aiel. She doesn't answer at all, and so he says he would like to see the Tganza again, and mentions the Sasara causing her to blush, and then saying her mother would be furious if she even knew that she could dance it. She then says that men will give their fortunes to see it, and he says that is unnecessary because his fortune is already hers. Eventually, the pain from the arrow gets to Perrin, and the boys begin singing a song about returning from war, kind of gathering their focus and getting their minds off of the losses they've recently suffered. As they make their way into town, they see that a number of the shepherds are being guarded by people with bows, and they also see that there is a large stake fence being erected and armed guards with spears and pole arms defending the village, as well as the fact there are several catapults, which Yvonne says he gave them the plans for how to produce. The people are cheering for Perrin and calling him Perrin Golden Eyes, and he wonders that even the people who he knew when he was young are cheering for him. There is also a flag that has been raised, which is white with a red wolf's head, and Varen and Alana apparently arranged for the flag to be raised. Faile wonders at Morghase's reaction to the flag, worrying that she may see this as rebellion, but Perrin dismisses it, saying that this really isn't even a part of Caemlyn. Varen then approaches, saying that Alana is necessary to heal Perrin's wound, but there is no need for the Aes Sedai to hide anymore, and we learn that Varen has been kind of participating in preparing the village for its defense and has been giving them a number of kind of pieces of advice, and eventually she sends someone to get Alana, or to get Daisy Conger to heal most of the people, and then says Alana will take care of Perrin, which he finds quite ominous. That is a long chapter with like 2 or 3 fun, interesting moments. What did you find most interesting here? Because this feels like the kind of chapter that isn't one thing happen, it's 8.
Yeah, it's funny. You just, as you continued on to reveal where I went, I had a window that was open and some neighbors started fighting. So I jumped up to go close the window and I was like, wow, Tyler's just really going. He's just, nope, he's not stopping. So it surprised me in just that my notes are a little more thin here, which it's like, it felt like there were a couple fun bits and then just a lot of kind of details that, like I'll give, for example, the fact that Emond's Field is essentially being fortified and turned into, it's like interesting, glad to know it's happening, don't really have anything to say about it. So
Correct.
in that regard, and outside of my brand, I will say that the dream was the most interesting to me. And what stood out the most in my kind of thinking about it was how smart Perrin was,
Yeah.
right? That there's this game going on where he's being taunted and baited to come out in the open and start a fight, and he does not give in. And so my first note was like, better than Matt, right? Because Matt would have
Yeah.
given in, no question. He would have been out there on the first taunt. And so the fact that Perrin, I was thinking about, well, is this another sign of Perrin's maturity? Is this the wolfiness that, the kind of apex predator instinct to, stalk and hunt the slayer? Or, I'm not sure, but I liked that characterization in that bit, even if it was just a small part of it.
I really like that. And I want to tie it into the thing about this chapter I actually alluded to earlier and then didn't want to say because some of our listeners read these chapters separately, which is the fact that when Perrin arrives in the wolf dream, he immediately is surprised that he has his hammer at his side. And I think that's both emblematic of maybe the fact that Perrin isn't quite as set on violence as he seemed in his conversation with the Tinkers. But I also think it kind of plays into what you're describing is someone who was kind of truly all in on the axe, if you will, probably charges in violent the way that you're describing. But Perrin is more thoughtful than that. He's deliberate. And I think that that is part of what I really like about him as a character is I think every other character in this book would probably have fallen for that trap, right? Perrin and Moraine are the only people, and maybe Varen, who I would trust to not immediately jump headfirst after being taunted.
Yeah, and so beyond that, it just felt like the main point we should take from that is that there's a big showdown coming, right? Yeah. That this is what we're building towards in this plot line is Perrin is going to have to face Slayer. Now, outside of my notebook, as you summarized, I was very interested in the details I had not captured that this Slayer figure looks like Lan or reminds him of Lan. And as I recall, there is a missing Lan relative.
That is correct.
Could be the other person.
Just a quick reminder. Dad? No, just a quick reminder of 3 books ago. During the fall of Malkier, there was Lan's uncle betrayed Lan's father. And so when Lan fled south, simultaneously Lan's cousin, I believe, Isam, as well as his aunt, vanished into the Blight, which of course is code in any fantasy book for probably isn't dead. So we should know, well, Perrin is insisting there are no living Malkieri other than Lan. We have at least one other potential option here, Isam, who would probably look significantly like Lan. I also just want to quickly note, we've all probably made this connection, but a couple of chapters ago, we had Nynaeve encounter someone who she was shocked looked almost identical to Lan in the World of Dreams. We now are pretty solid that that was Slayer, which indicates that he's not just in the Two Rivers, but kind of the World of Dreams more broadly drawn.
And this is me metagaming. The mythology of this world is it could just be there was a man named Isam who turned to the dark side, or it could be that he was taken over by a Forsaken, kind of like a Forsaken power could be controlled. Because I guess the question in that is, am I thinking, is this just somebody trying to curry favor with whatever will happen eventually? Or is this one of the 13? And up until now, there's a video game analogy in here. This has felt like a real mini boss. Here's the princess's tower fight, not a Koopa you stomp on the way to the castle.
Totally.
And if it's just Isam, that feels more like a Koopa you just step on, whereas a Forsaken would be not here in this castle, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you don't have to answer any of that. I'll just say that's where my mind is. I'm trying to figure that out.
I like that. I think the only hint that we've got here is clothing, right? Because if this is a Forsaken, they are either adopting Malkieri clothing or they are dressed oddly for someone from thousands of years ago. So that would be my one indication that maybe this feels slightly more likely to be Isam, but it could also be a Forsaken in a disguise, right? But they're choosing the disguise of a Malkiri if it is one of the Forsaken. Other than that, I thought the interesting kind of twist at the end that the original plan was just to kind of harry the White Cloaks and not cause any real devastation until Perrin showed up, and now the plan is to devastate the Two Rivers. And given that Perrin is currently kind of struggling with his, general imposter syndrome, and I mean that general like capital G, he's leading an army, not general, just like everything. I think this is very likely to kind of feed the struggle that he's already had, which is that what if he's not making the problem better? Slayer is now suggesting he's making the problem worse.
Yeah, and I don't want to every week just say scoring of the Shire, but all of this just feels like the scoring of the Shire,
Yeah.
which comes at the end of Lord of the Rings, which is the end of book 3, but the equivalent here would be like the end of book 15. So it's really interesting that
Yeah.
this is kind of all unfolding here early in the hero cycle, right? So the scoring of the Shire in terms of your Campbell monomyth is because the hero is supposed to return home having changed and kind of become the master of both worlds. And in this case, it would be weird if Perrin is kind of that
Yeah.
ultimate all powerful at the end of book 4 when we have a lot more books to go. So while I see shades of that monomyth, I see Robert Jordan productively disrupting it, which is where I love stories to be now. I think we've
Yeah.
killed the monomyth through repetition, and there are a lot of other fun ways to tell stories.
I think we've highlighted in the past on this podcast the first 3 books of the Wheel of Time are not my favorite Wheel of Time. And I think the reason why is because this is the first moment where we break out of that very like Campbell Tolkien straightforward fantasy story. And that's what I really appreciate about this is it feels reminiscent of those stories, but also is not following the playbook the way that we're kind of expected to. I'll be honest, the next like 2/3 of, or the next like maybe like third of this chapter, all of my notes are about Faile just bowling over Perrin. I don't have much to say about the remainder of the non-Two Rivers part of this chapter. Is there anything that stood out to you about the farewell sequence?
No, I literally have nothing else. I have what I just said out loud, big showdown coming. And then my next note is Emmons Field. So when you were doing your summary, I was like, oh, wow, I skipped a big chunk. I think you're right, like a third right in the middle there.
The interesting thing that I do want to note here, I tried real hard to track down the origins of these dances. The Teganza is based on the Teganza, which is a type of music that is popularized by the Romani. Perfectly fits the Tinkers. I could find absolutely no historical or cultural equivalent to the Sassara. If anyone has a good idea of what that might be, let me know. But that was the one I could not track down. But I do think the fact that one of these is based in real culture feels straight up Robert Jordan-y. I guess I just wanted to give you an excuse to talk about sexy dances if you really wanted to.
I enjoy them. I've done many myself. Continue.
Excellent. Other than that, the moment that stood out to me next is something that I keep harping on that I'm not sure you care about even a little bit, which is Bane, Chiad, and Gaul. The moment when Perrin asks Gaul whether they played Maiden's Kiss, and Gaul is shocked and then seemingly interested and wants to very specifically know which one of them suggested it, and then seemed baffled by the fact that it is Chiad. That just hints at so much more nuance to those characters and depth to what they're kind of thinking and doing that Perrin just isn't noticing. It's just intriguing to me to try to figure out what those 3 characters are doing in their separate time, because we only are really getting Gaul's side of it because Bane and Chiad really only pay attention to Faile and we're never in her head.
And this is where my comments on the Two Rivers boys apply here, right? Like I'm trying more and more to pull those Aiel apart, and it's hard because they're not getting a lot of screen time, quote unquote, right? Like they are just kind of there, and there are these references, and I found myself doing the math of like, well, wait, it was Matt that was like sleeping with as many Aiel as he could back in Tier. And so it's like, wait, so trying to remember, because this is like a sexy times game, right? Like
So
it's not like a fighting game, or
yeah,
is it?
so the game as Matt described it was the women put spears to your throat and then kiss you, and if they like your kiss, they pull the spear back a little, and if they don't like the kiss, they push the spear in a little.
Hmm.
So a
I
little
mean,
bit of both, which
we
feels
all
very
played that in
Aiel.
high school. Yeah. We all played that in high school, growing up in rural New Hampshire.
Yeah, obviously.
So that's what we do. So that what I kind of took from that dynamic is like, parents trying, right?
Yeah.
Like he's trying to bond with them, and it's kind of,
Yeah.
it's like when I have my Spanish 3 vocabulary and can sputter out 3 sentences to a Spanish speaking student. And it's like they know it's pitiful and I'm trying way too hard, but they still are like, you know
Totally.
what, he's trying, even if like it's a miserable fail. So it feels kind of like that. Like they're
Yeah,
just kind of, a mix of surprise and kind of like appreciating the gesture more than
totally.
anything deep about it.
I just want to put like a little flag on this in the same way that one of my projects for this reread is finally actually keeping all of the Aes Sedai straight. One of my other projects for this reread is trying to have Bane as a character in my head and Chiad as a character in my head rather than them just being Bane and Chiad. So the fact that Chiad got a call out and Bane didn't immediately, I was like, oh, that might be distinguishing. So I'm trying real hard, I promise. We then get to the two rivers, and boy, oh boy, does this feel a lot like one of our favorite Star Wars plots that it's appeared 7 different times. That's right, y'all. It's a 7 Samurai.
I'm sorry, Star Wars? I think you mean Rebel Dream Part 1 and 2.
Oh,
That just I don't know if you've had the pleasure, and by which I mean the absolute horror of watching that. But basically it is just Seven Samurai.
I
And
tried. It wasn't good.
oh my God, you didn't get to the second one? The second one pauses for, I kid you not, 15 minutes of harvesting wheat. And it's just like gorgeously shot. Couldn't be better HD footage of just wheat being harvested. And you're like, what's happening?
Yeah,
What's happening?
I've watched Terrence Malick movies. I'm good on my wheat for the lifetime. That doesn't sound appealing
Um,
at all.
but yes, and I guess, just to pick up on the transformation is happening there, and it does feel like the Two Rivers is rising up and is answering the call
Yeah.
to be a part of that. And that is part of the Seven Samurai style plot, that the common folk do kind of follow the lead of whoever it is that is in the samurai role. But it's exciting, and I liked Perrin walking in, and the flag, and that they all know his name, that he's really a hero to them.
Yeah.
That's exciting, even if it's not necessarily feeling totally original.
A couple quick call outs I want to do in that section. Number one, I don't know whether you recognized Perrin's flag, but we've heard about it before. Min once had a vision of Perrin with a white banner with a red wolf's head on it. So this is likely an important symbol for him. I also think it is relatively important to note in this section. Well, I don't even know if it's important to know. I just thought it was great. There are a bunch of really interesting moments where Perrin is like, oh, I knew this person from that time in my life. And there's like a few of them. One of them is Perrin's first kiss, which I just thought was a fun detail. The other one is a second mention of the woman who in the television show is Perrin's wife, and in the book is just a character he mentions offhand a couple times.
Oh, I keep forgetting about his book different or his show differences. So crazy. Cool. Very cool.
That is more or less what I've got here. Varen shows up. She's intriguing as she always is. I'm supposed to be afraid of Alana because we've gotten a bunch of negative hints about her. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. Any last thoughts at the end of this chapter?
Just you said it in your summary, but the big moment at the end where it was like, really ringing the alarm bell on Alana, that Perrin, who has an increased danger sense, feels great danger. So
let me ask you this question. Is the Alana evil thing a red herring? I know you don't have any more insight than what we've just read, but I want to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I feel like I just said this about something else recently, but it feels like the number of clues has passed beyond the I'll give you 7 and you'll find 2 and feel really satisfied to the I will give you 20 just to make it clear that this is not where I'm going.
Okay.
And so it's starting to feel more like a red herring. If I had to put
Okay.
money down right now, I would put it on red herring. There are some hints here that the Aes Sedai have been working, the Aes Sedai and the Warders have been working behind the scenes to
Yeah.
really, get this town up and running. I guess they are the samurai of the Seven Samurai plot
Totally.
in a lot of ways. Because Perrin's just arriving now, so he would have
Yeah.
had to be here training them if he were one of the samurai. So I am starting to feel better about them, but we'll see, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I 65% towards she's a good person, not 90% towards she's a good person.
One more question I had about how you took some of this discussion. In their discussion about kind of the future of the town and the flag, Faile mentions that Morgaze is likely to be very unhappy with kind of a new banner being raised in the Two Rivers. I was curious what your thoughts on where that kind of fits in the series is. Are you seeing that as like a major conflict to come? Are you seeing that as like a minor thing that will have to get ironed out? Like, that could be something that you could read in a variety of ways. And I'm curious how big of a flag it raised for you.
I'm going to tell it to you like it's Game of Thrones. So in Game of Thrones, the books, especially more than the television show, it's in both, but there are the conflicts where there are the houses that are named and the great families fight each other for a piece of territory. But then there are the conflicts where one of the houses one of the lesser lords that reports to the Starks kind of peels away and does their own thing, and kind of you have to get all your ducks in order to go fight the great houses. So this felt more like the second. This felt like, oh, Morgaze controls these 5 pieces of territory. This one is not, right? And it is actually very much, it feels like the King of the North in the Game of Thrones, right? It's like there's some other kind of politics here that are breaking them away. That doesn't necessarily mean they're enemies. It just means you're gonna have to deal with, are they gonna stay in line, or are they gonna work the way you want them to? So
no, I
that's
like that a lot.
where I'd put it.
Okay, cool.
Oof. I hadn't thought that deep about Game of Thrones in such a long time. This is just a bald-faced endorsement, mainly to Tylor, but also to the world. There is an incredible movie out right now called I Saw the TV Glow. And if you're around Tylor, well, Tylor, you're a lot younger than me, but if you're around my age, which is I was born in 83, I was, a teenager in the late 90s, and you got like obsessed with really bad television, this is the movie for you, because it's all about what it was like to be a Buffy fan or an X-Files fan or like Pete and Pete or Are You
I'm
Afraid of
sorry,
the
are
Dark?
you calling these bad television shows? Because I will fight you about 2 of them.
Oh my God. Like this is like the core of the movie. It is so brilliant. But I was listening to the director. Their name is Jane Schoenhorn. I probably am pronouncing that wrong because that's my brand. But they were talking about how one of the bummers of being somebody who loved all those shows is they all ended badly.
Yeah.
Like it was often they were canceled between seasons, or they replaced an actor, or they couldn't. And it's like, they were talking about the psychological trauma of our generation in that they never got a satisfying ending. And the interviewer brought up is like Game of Thrones was probably the biggest mass culture. It's like we were all obsessed and the whole world's talking about it. And then the ending sucks. So we just like all pretend it didn't happen and move on. So everybody should see the movie. I saw the TV Glow. It's probably on demand very soon, but if it's in a theater near you, it is the craziest, wildest thing I've seen in the movies in a long time.
There are many things you said in there that I am willing to fight you about. Buffy ended great. I know I'm the only person in the world, but Game of Thrones had like a B- ending. It's not as terrible as everyone said. That being said, I'm going to see that movie. That sounds really great. I have nothing else to say about these 2 chapters. I thought they were fun. I thought we finally had characters actually saying words to each other, which is a really wonderful thing to see. And we've got two more exciting chapters, at least one of them. I don't know about the second, but the first one definitely from Perrin's perspective. Again, we have chapter 43, Care for the Living, and chapter 44, The Breaking Storm, coming up next week. Greg, what are you anticipating as we make our way? You can say it when it's your turn.
I'm anticipating that the roller coaster will continue down the hill because I don't think we've had any of our usual cliches this episode. So I will say in my copy, I really enjoyed that today's reading ended exactly on page 700. So we are down below 300 pages to the end of this. As you said at the beginning, 10 more weeks. And that's really just means we're all going to spend the summer in this book and then get to crack open a new one in the fall. And that's really excited. So, hey, you know what? I think you all should come back with us next time through the glass columns. So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.